Hello and welcome to the BurnCast. I'm Brady Byrne.
And I'm Kim Cass.
Today we're looking at a book called Born of the Shade by author D.O. Thomas. As always, any criticisms directed towards the authors of works that we discuss are exaggerated for entertainment purposes and are not meant to be taken personally. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Let's talk about Born of the Shade.
Let's talk about it.
So this is the first book in a series of 3 books in the Viventium cycle. And let's talk about Born of the Shade, but let's also talk about exposition.
Yes, let's talk about exposition.
How do we feel about exposition, Kim?
You know, like, it's... people get confused. You see these pieces of writing advice, and it's always like, show, don't tell, you know, like, it's always absolute. You either do something 0 or 100.
Yeah.
And it has all to do with context, but you can do a lot without explaining things to people because people are very willing to believe what you're writing.
Yeah.
And our imaginations are big and they're fueled by other things we've read and common knowledge and our own flavorful imaginations.
Yeah.
If I say the word lightning sword, you can have a few things in your head, but I don't need to tell you too much about it so you get the picture, you know?
Yeah.
And it is so crippling to your storytelling if every time someone is introduced or someone walks through the door or something's happening that you go, and now it's like imagine if you were watching a movie and the camera pulled away from the scene and turned to someone and he was just like, okay, so this guy is like a total badass and he's from this place and he's got these powers and, you know, he's trying to do these things because of these reasons.
And he likes this person, but he doesn't like that person. And let me give you a good reason why.
Yeah.
It brings the story to a halt. And that is this entire book.
It's 80% exposition. Honestly, I think in realistic numbers, it's 80% exposition, which, I mean, who wants to read that?
Yeah. And we've complained a lot about exposition in the kinds of books that we usually read. And we've talked about when to use exposition and what kinds we don't like. And it's not because we don't like exposition. Sometimes you just need it. Sometimes you just need a character to get somewhere, and there are clever ways to disguise your exposition. There are clever ways to include it in the narrative and the dialogue and those sorts of things. But if you're ever writing your story and a scene comes up where you stop whatever's happening to write a sentence that goes, this character never or always did whatever, because just stop.
Yeah.
Stop right there and think about that information that you want to include. That this person is like this. Or if you're about to say he did this because, just think about another way to include that, please, because otherwise you end up with Born of the Shade, which has some of the laziest writing I've ever seen in a book.
Yeah.
And this is very similar to some of the other books we've talked about, particularly this season, in that this is not a book. This is one part of what should be a book.
Yeah.
There are 3 books in this series, and they should be one book. And then if you want to make a sequel to that, go ahead. But this book doesn't end.
No.
It barely even has a story to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, like, you're setting up the characters more than anything else. Honestly, that's what this is.
Yeah, and every single character that's introduced, which is a lot of characters, it gets a full 4 to 8 paragraphs about who they are, who their family is, what kind of magic they know, what their profession is, and what their personality is like.
And they're not even relevant.
No.
I will say that for the larger blocks of exposition, I'm like, okay, skip this. I don't need to know why this character is here. Like, just skip that.
You can skip so much of this book.
But then I get to certain parts of the story and I'm like, did I miss something? Because, like, this seems to be the same thing as, like, what was happening a few chapters ago. And then I go back and I'm trying to pick up what's going on. And no, nothing happened.
No.
Like, it's just the same shit.
And the reason I skipped so much as well is because you can't expect me to read sentences that start off like this, that go, Noir, who's our main protagonist, didn't express astonishment like most would. Instead, he felt it deep in his mind, and it annoyed him like a child annoys an elder. And I scroll down, and it's still talking about that. He didn't usually get worried, but at this point he was close to panic. Blah, blah, blah. Noir racked his brain for an answer to what he was witnessing, but he could only find fear, another emotion, nor hated. And it's just like,
oh my god.
Is this a character biography, or is it a story? And so I skip a lot of those things because they're boring and they're not treating me like an intelligent reader. They're treating me like an idiot. And I skip past a few paragraphs. I'm like, oh, there's something important happened in between the blocks of exposition.
Yeah. If you want to get a good example of just how terrible this exposition is,
Kristoff, also known as the Arcane University's Dean of Misplaced Knowledge, was one of the few wizards to be born a warlock. Raised by his mother, a witch in the highest prestige, Kristoff spent his preteen years studying the mystic art of witchcraft in the school founded by his mother's mage's circle. As a male witch, or warlock, as they have come to be known, cannot study amongst the opposite sex after puberty. He was sent to his father's coven. At the age of 19, the highly intelligent warlock had mastered his family's art and had grown tired of the life he had been living. Kristoff was a kind soul, and it was because he chose to teach the youth of his coven. But as the masculine side of witchcraft is mostly comprised of maleficent blood magic, it pained Kristoff to teach the young in its evil ways. He would often mix the teachings of feminine witchcraft in the hope that it might quell the darkness that would eventually rise in his pupils.
That times 100 for the whole book.
After a few years of raising some of the most dangerous warlocks the world would ever see, Kristoff fell into a deep depression. Standing at the edge of a tower block, Kristoff contemplated a one-way trip to hell. He was only 25 and had lived a long enough life. He couldn't take back the evil he had put into the world, but at least he could take himself out of it. And then Kristoff was wearing his usual Viridian robes, decorated with tea stains, accentuated with biscuit crumbs, and dotted with little balls of lint. He was sitting in his antique oaken chair at the antique oaken desk. Kristoff had a thing for antique oak.
It just...
Quite like the thing his single mother on benefits had for a leopard print.
It's like...
Sitting opposite the oak-obsessed wizard was a witch. Her light brown skin spoke of purity and youth, but the faded light in her eyes whispered tales of despair and deception. The witcher's hair curled diligently down to her shoulders and had the shine one would attempt to gain from a bottle of L'Oreal. Oh my god. And that's not even the end of this exposition block.
No, it's like he's in a competition to see how much he could write without progressing the story.
Yeah.
Like, let's see how far I can go. Like,
you see that exposition, and it's like the next 5 pages, and it's like, okay, you're telling me all about the fucking oaken desks and oaken chairs and how single mothers like leopard print, and this lady uses L'Oreal shampoo, and it's like, somewhere in there, a character was introduced.
Yeah.
I'm skipping past all that shit, though, because it is just pointless.
Yeah, and it is funny to hear you read it out loud, because, you know, you're like, oh, exposition, whatever, but when you read it out loud, you're like, holy shit, this is not anything.
No.
Nothing. It's like, just drivel. It's garbage.
It's rambles.
It's rambles, yeah. Like, why am I reading about these characters if they're not ever going to be used in a critical way to the story?
And it's extremely redundant, giving the same info over and over, often within the same block of exposition, repeating things you just heard.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that you get terrible repetition with these sort of books is because the writer can't remember what they've written in the exposition because it's boring and dull. So, like, they can't remember, so they feel like they need to say it again.
Yeah. To be honest, it reads a lot of times like they have their big document that's outside of the book where they've written down all their characters and all their backstories and stuff, but they didn't take that backstory and weave it into the narrative. They just literally took the backstory from their story Bible and just inserted it into the book.
Oh, yeah.
And just said, all right, job's done. That character is fleshed out now.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Control-C, Control-V, like, let's go, you know?
Yeah. I mean, like, even well into the book, it's still giving us lines about the main character. Like, amongst other things, Noir was a self-proclaimed elitist. He detested anyone who would stoop so low as to settle for less than they had originally set out for. Due to his self-centered view on non-settlement, Noir detested most people. It's like, okay, first of all, 2 ways of saying he detests people. Second, that's like near the end of the book. If I don't already know this by now, then you shouldn't be telling me. And third, am I supposed to like this guy? Like, again, he's just a fucking asshole.
Yeah. I like to think about it like this. You have to look at your book from outside of a single page. You have to take a step back and go like, what have I done in this chapter? You know?
Yeah.
Have I progressed the story? And then take another step back. Okay, what have I done in the first act? What has happened? And if you're not doing that, then you're just going to end up writing the same thing over and over and over and over again in the same blocks of exposition.
Yeah.
And you're going to end up with a story that doesn't finish. It barely begins.
It really barely begins.
And it's so frustrating. And that's why we often say that these books feel like scams, because you pick up a book hoping to get to read a start, middle, and end. And if you only get a start, you're like, okay, well, that's not what I paid for. Yeah. You know, that's not what I paid my hard-earned cash, my hard-earned currency, my $1.40 or whatever.
Yeah.
it leaves you bitter.
Yeah, and so we'll talk about what this book essentially is. It describes itself as an urban fantasy adventure story. I don't know what adventure it takes me on because nothing really happens, but it takes place in West London on a night when a curious full blue moon is rising. And our main character's name is Noir. It talks about how he's like a supernatural information broker. This is... It's a ripoff of a lot of things, this story.
Yeah, it's kind of like Artemis Fowl / Harry Potter / Twilight / something else. But it misses all the marks because those are actual stories. And like, this is just nothing, you know? But I would like to say that we might as well call Noir D.O. Thomas.
Yeah.
So Thomas, Noir, it seems to be quite a self-insert from the way the book looks on the cover and in the story.
Particularly because if you look at the second book in the series, the graphic of the character on the cover looks a lot like the author does.
It must be him.
But I don't know why you would want to insert yourself as this character Noir. He's like a lazy, drunk, skeeving, slimy asshole who only cares about himself, and it's not clear what his motivations are.
No.
Or what anyone's motivations are. I mean, the only plot point is that there's this blue moon, and it's causing all sorts of weird disturbances in the supernatural realm.
Yeah.
Everything supernatural is like hidden from real life. You know, it's the underground secret that no one knows about lichens and vampires and this sort of thing.
Like in Harry Potter.
Yeah, just like in Harry Potter.
Yeah, just like in Harry Potter.
And the only thing that happens is like, some werewolves are turning into their monstrous form, and this guy who's like a supernatural cop goes around and like gives them infractions. And that's kind of it. There's no core conflict in the main character or any of the other characters.
Basically, this cop goes around dishing out these infractions, and the main characters of the book go around talking to one another, usually at this underground bar, and they talk about how they got infractions.
Yeah, that's like literally it. Jumps from scene to scene about how, those vampires, they're out in the street tonight and they're killing people, you know, beyond their quota. I guess vampires have like a quota of people they're allowed to eat. And it's like, you got an infraction now. And the vampires are pissed, but you know, not as pissed as the werewolves. Like, that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
The story doesn't go anywhere from there.
And I really wonder how people get to this point. How do they finish 3 books and publish them without knowing these very, very basic concepts?
I don't know.
What's going on? That's a mystery to me, like a big one.
But let's talk about the story, or whatever bits of it we can pull out that I would call a story.
Yeah.
The main part of this book is that at the beginning, Noir is walking through the streets when a blue beam shoots down out of the sky and into the lifeless body that he finds beneath a barren tree. This is like a corpse, and it gets raised from death, and Noir's character is instantly confusing from this point. It talks, again, like how he doesn't really express emotions and how he doesn't get worried and nothing surprises him. He's just such a fucking cool, calm, collected badass.
He knows everything, but he doesn't know what's going on now. Like,
just a few lines later, it's like, he's so scared, and he's frozen and shocked, and it's like, well, which one is it?
Yeah.
But then, like, right after that, the corpse gets up, and it starts talking to him, and Noir starts smiling. And it's like, what is this character? Which emotion is it?
I thought you didn't know what was happening.
Yeah. Is he confused? Is he aware? Is he afraid? Or is he surprised? Or is he happy? Like, if you start off and I don't know what this character's core emotion is, then of course I'm not going to be able to feel it myself.
And he proceeds to name this undead creature Silence, of course.
Yeah.
Because it starts up their interaction by doing the stereotypical, like, scream thing where, like, its mouth goes down way further than it should normally be able to, and it just, like, screams, and black blood comes out, and it's, ooh, spooky, like, and then he names it Silence, and then the thing doesn't know what's going on.
Well, does it or doesn't it? Because he asks the corpse if it remembers anything, and it says, no, I don't remember anything. And then immediately after, the corpse says, I know where I am, I know where I've been, I know a lot of things, but I don't know who or what I am. And it's like, I don't know anything now because you've given me contradictory things.
Yeah, you're being contradicted at so many levels. It's within the same sentence, you get that. But he takes this creature back to his, like, home.
He offers it a job, basically.
Yeah, he gives him a job. Basically, like, his assistant.
But again, like, nothing seems realistic because they go to, like, a bus stop. Noir's trying to take Silence home. He's trying to take this shadow fiend with them to his house. And Silence is, like, drenched in blood. You know, he's a fucking corpse. And the people at the bus stop all see him and they like freak out. They're like, oh shit, what is this? You know, no one knows about the supernatural world. So they're like, wow, this guy's drenched in blood and he has black eyes and like, what's wrong with him? And then some old lady offers him like a few tissues. And then, like, everyone's cool about it.
Yeah.
They're all just like, oh, it's all good now. Like, this man drenched in blood is, got a few tissues. Now he's all cleaned up. It's all good.
And again, that's one of those situations where, like, you're instantly taken out of the story because, like, characters are acting so unrealistically, even within the context of the story, that you just can't take it seriously in any form, you know? And this is all dead serious.
Yeah.
Not much of this is supposed to be, like, funny.
No, none of it's tongue-in-cheek, pretty much, except for a few moments where it tries to be, but it completely falls on its face.
It fails, yeah.
But so then we're introduced to Lares, the werewolf, and he sees the blue moon and he struggles to maintain his human form.
In this story, the werewolves, and really only the beginning of the story, or whatever parts I skipped over, they take Lycanade to subdue their werewolf turn.
Yeah.
They take this Lycanade, and it stops that process. And I just thought, like, couldn't you have made it a spell or some sort of, like, thing that's not so stupid? Like, Lycanade. It's like commercial brand Nutri-Paste. Like,
Lycanade.
You can't make something up that dumb. Like, come on.
And then we get a terrible introduction to another character who's our magic cop. His name's Leo. Again, it's so lazy. It talks about how he's the definition of conspicuous. Just show me that. Like, I'm not convinced by you just saying that.
Yeah, just make him conspicuous. It's like the other stories, you know. He was a master with guns, like, but he just can't even, like, use a gun for shit.
But so Leo is like, it says he's a Zodiac king, a supernatural lawkeeper. And he fines Lares for transforming in public. Or something.
Yeah, I just want to kind of say, I love that within this world, it's just like, yeah, hey, boy, you turned into a wolf in public? That's $200. Like,
yeah, it's like all you get.
Okay.
But so Lares is pissed at Noir for this. I don't know why. I guess because he didn't warn the werewolf order of the blue moon and its effects. But I don't know why it's his problem.
And, like, don't they just already know that blue moons can happen and, you know, it might fuck with your shit?
Yeah, I mean, it's never explained what the blue moon is or why it's rising or why a blue moon is different from a regular moon. All that is just alluded to. You'll get that story in the next part.
Or the third one.
Or you won't. Fuck you. But so Leo, our magic cop, is Nora's older brother. And him and the werewolf see the blue beam from the sky, which I guess is the same beam that Noir saw. Lares turns into his werewolf form, and then they fight.
Oh, of course.
Of course, Leo wins, because he's super badass. And for some reason, he takes back his infraction of Lares, because he enjoyed fighting him.
He's a good man. He's a good cop. Like, imagine if they just did that with all police, like, interactions.
So supernatural law has no meaning in this world, basically.
No.
I just don't understand why you want to set these things up as, like, the core tenets of your story and then just break those rules.
Instantly, yeah.
I guess because they want to develop his character, like, oh, he just enjoyed the fight so much, he's going to reward his opponent by not giving him an infraction. And it's like, all right, cool. Got it.
To be honest, if you have a character like the lawkeeper or something like that, you know, someone who is absolute neutral, you just will always enforce the law, and that can be scary, you know?
Yeah.
If you have characters playing with that boundary, and he cannot be reasoned with, and he will always enforce it. But if your character is the lawkeeper, and he can be instantly made to break those laws, then you've taken all the power out of him, you've taken all the fear factor out of him, he's just another pointless buffoon.
Yeah. But the next thing we get to is this nightclub, and we're introduced to two vampire characters. And they're just your typical vampires. There's just nothing creative about them. They're all suave and important, and the bouncer lets them cut the lines, and
they're super sexy.
They instantly start hooking up with two gorgeous women.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I would just want to quickly bring up. Another stereotypical thing of these terrible books. Always the girls are just a pointless mate for the guys.
Yeah.
I mean, like, why even have women if they're not to serve the guys' love interests?
No. Why would you? Yeah.
Yeah, why?
One of them takes one of these girls the alley and like feasts on her. And then it says the vampire assaults the barman in the alley with like a wooden cross. But like when the cross touches him, it burns him and makes him grow older.
Yeah.
I thought vampires were the ones weak to crosses. I don't think they use them as weapons.
These are Catholic vampires.
That's the thing is, like, if you're going to have your urban fantasy magic world and you're going to say it's totally unique, I have, like, different rules to my magic system and, like, vampires use crosses as weapons instead of are weak to them. But then you set up all of these tropes, like vampires and werewolves, as having the same properties that I've seen them have 1,000 times in other media. Then you've got a disconnect there. Like, is your world unique or is it a copy of something else with, like, a few changes?
Yeah, if you tell me he's a vampire, I'm immediately going to assume all the vampire things. Like, he drinks blood, he can probably turn into a bat, he's probably afraid of the light, you know, with varying degrees. And it would seem to me like if I was going to write a vampire story, I would be like, oh, great, I can just say they're vampires, and then I can just skip all the exposition about what they can do and why they're there. I don't need to explain jack shit.
Yeah, but this book does anyways.
I know, as if you don't, like, oh, and it's crushing. Do you want to read 50 pages about what a vampire is?
The other thing that this part of the story does is, like, it tries to avoid calling them vampires for, like, the longest time.
Oh, yeah.
It gives you these, like, little hints, as if they're not completely obvious that they're vampires. Like, oh, you know, he bit into her neck and he doesn't want to get in the light and he's talking about how old he is, but he still looks young. And it's like, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
They're vampires. You haven't said they're vampires, but I know they're vampires.
And he has pale skin and he has dark hair and he has a twinkle in his eyes.
Yeah. And then they go back in the bar and the other vampire's like seducing some girl there. And she leans in close and she notices that he doesn't have a heartbeat. And she says, oh, it's almost as if you're dead.
Ooh.
Ooh, spooky. Like, it's trying so hard to say that they're vampires without explicitly saying they are. But then it just finally gives in and says they're vampires. Like,
yeah, it's incredible, really, to read something like this, because it's like, what planet are you growing up on where you need to explain this to people, you know? It's like, imagine if you read a book and someone pulled out a sword and they tried to avoid calling it a sword for the longest possible time.
Yeah.
It's like, you wouldn't do it for a normal tool, so why are you doing it for what is basically and essentially a character tool?
Yeah.
Making someone a vampire is just a tool for creating a plot that creates difficult situations for them.
Yeah.
A vampire has a difficult life because they need to do extreme things, which is a great tool for creating conflicts, creating all the things that normal books have. But I feel like this person hasn't thought about that.
No.
Think about, why am I making this character a vampire? Why am I making this character a werewolf? What's the point of that? And is it actually doing anything? Is it creating complications for them? Are these vampires having difficult lives because they are vampires? Is there a conflict in the story because one is a vampire and, for example, one is a girl that he's in love with?
No, there isn't.
No. Of course not. Of course not.
The only things that happen are that Leo, our magic cop, shows up again, and they have this monologue. He's trying to give them an infraction for not taking care of their younglings. And he says, although we do welcome the abundance of the new recruits we have gained, my knights have had to slay at least 50 of your brood. Your younglings are completely out of control. Their infractions consist of openly feeding, public displays of inhumanity, inappropriate murder of the mundane, and unsanctioned kidnapping. As king of the vampire nation, you should have taken precautions to deal with the fallout of the blue moon. In failing to do so, I must issue you with an infraction. Okay. They're causing disruption in the streets. They're revealing the magical world and killing people savagely, and it's like,
that's an infraction.
Here's a little slip of paper, like, you know, pay 15 gold or whatever the fuck it is, like... That's the only source of conflict in this book, is that they can basically do whatever the fuck they want, and if they slip up a little bit, this guy just shows up and gives them a little bit of an infraction.
Yeah, he's like a parking ticket for dead bodies, you know?
Yeah, kind of. But so we get back to Noir, and we get a fucking description of his house.
Yeah. Because it's so necessary to the story to describe a Londoner's house, as if I can't imagine that. Yeah.
Yeah, like, not even a unique house. It just goes on like, oh, the house was no different from any other. A wooden porch, double glazed windows, moss-covered roof tiles, and the original guttering, probably filled with whatever muck gutters were filled with it.
Okay, thanks.
It's like the next 3 pages of that. Like, okay, what's happening there? What's he doing there?
If you're literally telling me this house is just just a normal fucking house, and it's normal in these ways. Excuse me, what?
Yeah, it goes into every fucking minor detail. How Noir had taken care to ensure that the brass knobs on the fingerprinted doors were polished. The magnolia-painted walls were unscathed, yet the bedding beneath them was so riddled with scuff marks that they were practically monochromatic. The bathroom was organized to an obsessive compulsive...
Turn it off, turn it off.
Like, stop. Stop. Like, it's his fucking house. I don't care what it's like in there. Does it tell me anything about his character? Not really. Maybe that he's a bit obsessive with taking care of it, but it doesn't fucking matter.
It's gutting.
It is gutting. He gives Silence his first mission, and he heads out on his way to complete it. It gives you a fucking description of his destination as well. It's just like a manor, and it says, pretentious art students happening to pass by the manor might look on the exterior with a somewhat blasé attitude. The interior, by contrast, was considered inspiring by many people. It had a monochromatic theme throughout its exquisite halls, with ceiling art resembling that of the ingenious Renaissance artists of Italy. Bright dots of light shone through the crystal chandeliers in the main hall and danced on the pitch-black decals, embraced by the pure white walls. Fuck, it's exhausting. That's like every third paragraph is another fucking description of where they are, and everything is monochromatic, and it's all the same description over and over again.
A key point I wanted to make, which really sums up the story for me, is that this book also doubles, and I'm sure the other two will as well, because I just cannot see him changing the way he writes between books.
Yeah.
Certainly not because he's not listening to this podcast. He's not receiving all this information, Please, D.O. Thomas, your agency is required. Please listen. Noir gives Silence an iPhone.
Yeah.
Now, okay, sure.
Sure.
You give him an iPhone.
I know what that is. I'm okay with it. Don't need to tell me what an iPhone is.
Yep. Oh, but he does. He does tell you. And it gives you exposition about how to use an iPhone. And not just in the beginning, but they also talk about the iPhones later on in the book. And Silence is always using his iPhone to get around places because he doesn't know what's going on, He doesn't know how to get around London, even though, does he know things? Does he not know things? I don't know. Who knows?
We have no idea.
We have no idea.
Noir's technically not the main character. It's really Silence. I mean, he's the character that we follow for the most part.
Yeah.
And this iPhone tells him everything. He can't even figure out where to go or who to talk to or how to talk to them without it.
Yeah. And imagine reading a book where there's like literally dialogue between this character and his phone. He's like talking to his phone all the time and it tells him where to go and stuff like that. And Noir leaves him little messages as if to like guide him, because instead of actually helping this character get around and do the things, or just being the character himself, instead of writing the book where this character is doing these things, let's have the main character message another character through his phone, and let's hear the phone talking to the character and guiding him around the place, because that's an effective way to tell a story.
Yeah, and it's also even more frustrating because Silence is the shadow fiend. He's a walking corpse. He has no memory. He's just a shell.
Yeah.
And he's like brain dead. When he gets these messages, he's like, what? I have to walk down the street? What is that? It's so frustrating to follow a character who can't understand very basic things. So you're just slogging through these descriptions of places and the things he's doing and the kinds of things he's saying.
Yeah. Jason Bourne is a character who doesn't know what's going on, but he also knows how to do a lot of things. And he's fun to watch and read because he runs around and does extreme things as if he subconsciously knows how to do them, but he doesn't know why he can do them.
Yeah, they're ingrained into his muscle memory.
Yeah, okay, perfect, good, yeah, interesting. And let's take a character like E.T. or Thor from the Avengers, he comes down to Earth and he doesn't know like the customs and what's going on. And you can do this with like time travel stories where like a character comes from the past and doesn't know how these things operate.
Yeah.
What is this wacky world? And it's fun to watch that. But it's funny, and it can't be the actual story.
No, I mean, that's your typical fish out of water scenario.
Yeah.
And it's funny because they're trying to understand this world, but this is like a fish who's never seen fucking water before.
Yeah, he's a goldfish. He's a fucking goldfish with an iPhone.
Yeah.
And maybe give me that in one chapter, and he's like, okay, but maybe by the next thing he's sort of mastered the phone, and he's like, okay, now I need to go here and do this thing, and I know how to Google Maps, Yeah. But it's like every fucking time he picks this thing up, he's like, I don't know how this works, And it's like, oh, man. But he's not the only character who uses an iPhone or an iPad or an Apple product. And we get great little descriptions throughout the book of other characters using their iPhones and iPads. And it's actually a great little commercial for iPhone and Apple in general. And we also get descriptions about what games they're playing on their phone or iPad.
Oh my god, yeah.
And the characters literally talk about iPhones and iPads as if they're significant. And I also want to quote and bring up certain things because it's just so dumb. Quote, "I don't understand why these damn things are made of glass," cursed Noir. Silence stared at the phone for a moment. Glass makes sense. It will slip off surfaces and the screen will shatter on impact. This isn't a design fault at all. It's genius. Create something in high demand, make it delicate enough for a short fall to damage it, and then charge to fix it. And like they agree on that as if it's like genius that it should be. No, excuse me. It's made out of fucking glass so you can see shit on the screen. How else do you make a screen?
It's like the author, they think they've come up with like a profound truth about, you know, big corporations.
Yeah, like they make them easy to break.
They use this planned obsolescence to make their products just shitty enough that if they break, you have to buy another one.
Yeah, why do they make windows out of glass and not steel? Like, I don't know. Maybe because
it's because the steel companies are trying to.
yeah, like what the fuck?
Should raise the prices of steel windows.
And it's given as if they're like, oh, this is a quirky comment on technology, you know, but it's just idiocy. Like, it's the dumbest thing I've ever read.
So Silence ends up at his destination and he meets Noir's nephew, and they have some wacky time travel timeline dialogue.
Yeah.
Which is really poorly thought out.
Yeah.
How, he has memories from his future, and is that going to play into anything? Spoiler, no, it's not.
No.
And he's like, oh, you need to meet this guy, Christoph. And you get a big description of who Christoph is.
Of course, because you need that.
He's talking to this fucking witch, and he's like, I understand that this place is some kind of university, but what do you teach here?
Oh no, don't ask that question.
The only thing worth learning, wizardry. Silence had a limited understanding of what a wizard was. He knew there had been a film made based on wizardry, and it had a boy with a lightning bolt scar who wore a pair of oddly shaped glasses.
Ooh, that's a nod. That's a nod, isn't it? Wow, how on the nose.
This book is so fucking lazy with the pop culture references, but it's so clear it's like, it's meant to be clever and shit. And it has these nonsense lines about, like, not explicitly saying Harry Potter, or other lines where Silence is looking at a bookshelf and it says, the book he picked up, De Vitae Sensu, contained from cover to cover a single equation ending with the number 42. And it's like, the author read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Great.
Yeah, great. Cool. Awesome.
But, like, references are fun if they're so subtle that only a select few people would even catch them.
Yeah.
Like, overall, your references should be invisible. Otherwise, they immediately take me out of the story, because it's like the author is telling a story in front of you and you're lost in it, and then he pauses to wink at you and make sure you got the reference.
Yeah, and if you did get it, he'll just straight up fucking tell you and shake you by the shoulders until you fucking like...
But like the references here are so obvious, calling back to like the most popular franchises ever. One particularly in Harry Potter's case that this is based on and ripped off of. And it serves no other purpose than to inflate the author's own ego and to point out, hey, I read popular book series too.
Yeah. Now, we were talking about the iPads and the iPhones, and I want to say that usually I would make a comment on like, oh, you know, if you're bringing up like popular farming games on like an iPad, you're going to date your book pretty quickly because those sort of things come in and out. It's like bringing up a specific Nintendo game that was only played during that time period or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, a popular cereal brand figure. There's no point in even bringing up those sort of criticisms because, like, honestly, it's not there. I can't make those criticisms in this book.
No.
Because for that to be a criticism, this would actually have to be a book or a story, you know? Like,
it's not a story. Every single line is just brain dead Silence going through different locations told to him by his phone. He shows up and he says, I don't understand this. Can you tell me how it all works?
And then, oh, yes, I will.
Yeah. Yes, I will. The characters sit back and
unfold their fucking life story. Like, oh, great.
You see, just to conjure a simple flame, you must fully understand that which allows said flame to ignite, as well as the chemical composites within your own body. And then there's the matter of putting all this knowledge to use, of course. And then it talks about the fucking magic system. Essentialism was practically the foundation of wizardry. Long ago, the grand wizard Plato...
yeah, you can't continue reading because it's so like...
Oh, yeah, Plato was... Okay, I just skip.
Instead of being on the nose, this is punching you in the nose. Like...
Yeah, there it is. Although Kristoff understood this as a fact amongst wizards, the witch in him always brushed essentialisms aside. For when it came to witchcraft, things were not always what they seemed to be. The great witch Circe once said, "That which is not to a witch." This saying had been passed down for generations and was originally loosely translated and substantially shortened. I wish this fucking book was substantially shortened.
Yeah, and I do have one particular thing. You did bring up the time travel thing before, but I do want to read it because it is brilliant. And this is really only a segment of it. You have to understand, this is not the full thing. This is just like a brilliant little paragraph of nonsense.
Yeah, I could keep going on that same fucking block of exposition I was reading earlier, and it would get us to the end of the episode.
Yeah. After a time, Silence grew tired of trying to understand, and Jaden grew weary of trying to explain. Jaden had, in the future, after several attempts, taught Silence the fundamentals of the time-traveling mind. However, for Silence, this was his first time hearing Jaden's detailed ramblings on how time and space are multidimensional and how his brain's functionality related to the theory of there being at least 3 parallel universes in which said brain existed. From the abundance of words that were being thrown at Silence, he managed to pick up that if you put a cat in a box and close it until you looked inside the box, the cat was both dead and alive. This was mainly because it was the only sentence Silence understood. And I read that and I was like, that sentence, that last sentence, this was mainly because it was the only sentence Silence understood. That's the only sentence that I understood.
Again, it's like, oh, the author likes reading about physics.
But he shoehorned it in such a terrible, terrible way. Like, and it's not relevant to anything.
No, it's not. Aside from those things, which you could, I guess, say as part of the story, that his mind time travels and this sort of thing, and that might play in book 2 or 3 because it doesn't play in here.
No.
But there is so much fucking nonsense exposition on pointless shit. We get back to Noir and he meets like a shape-shifting rat that turns itself into a better looking version of Noir. And then you get like 5 fucking pages of exposition about the fucking rat.
Yeah.
And some other lady. It's like, oh my god. You get to the end of that paragraph and it turns out the rat is his sibling and his name is Balthazar, and who fucking cares?
Yeah, and again, it's not relevant.
No.
It's not like his brother is working for the side of evil or he's come to like warn Noir of someone. Like, no. They're just going to the bar together. Like, they just go to the fucking bar together.
They go to the bar and they meet the vampires from earlier and they talk about their infractions and like literally nothing has happened by this point. And this is like 30% in. It's just been a fucking disparate collection of scenes. There's no core conflict. The characters haven't been given any development. Even the blocks of exposition are just telling us things that have already been established about those characters. No new information about what's going on with them in the present.
No. And I mean, like, you get this far into the book and you're like, there's just no way anything can happen at this point.
No.
Like, there's just no way, because I know how the author is writing and he's just never going to make a story out of this because he's got to get to the end of the book and he's still going to be describing Noir's clothes. Like,
and he does.
He does.
You know, when you come across writing advice, one of the ones you typically see often is from Kurt Vonnegut, where he says, start your story as close to the ending as possible. And that piece of advice is good for people who are developing these big, fantastical worlds with all these rules and your magic system and your mystical beasts and your magic iPhones and your shadow fiends and whatever it is. And you've got all that stuff written down in your story Bible, but that doesn't necessarily all go into the story. The story should start as close to the end as possible because that's where your story is. Not start your world at its inception.
No.
Like the fucking big bang of everything happening and then just troll along until you get to like something happening. No, start at the something happening. You need to give me an idea that this is going somewhere. And so far it hasn't gone anywhere.
No, and I wish I had something positive to say about this book, but I can't think of one.
I can't either.
I mean, it doesn't have spelling mistakes, I guess. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's like better than like the sub-trash that we usually look at, which is fine and nice. But if the shit is so boring that I can't read it, then that's worse than if it was spelled incorrectly.
I have a theory about why the grammar in this is pretty decent. Do you want to hear it?
Sure, go. Yeah.
I think it's because
there's 3 dimensions and the person was taking Lycanade.
If you listen to a lot of this exposition and how like overzealous a lot of the description of pointless shit is, like what fucking chairs are in the room and what the curtains look like, you can tell that this author loves his own writing. And he reads his own writing a lot.
Oh, yeah.
You can tell that he loves reading these long passages of his detailed world. So, of course, there's not going to be spelling mistakes because he's going to notice them.
Yeah, he's going to read through it over and over again. It's a shame he's looking for spelling mistakes and not a story, though.
Yeah, that's the thing, is he's reading the literal words, but he's not thinking about their meaning or whether they're working in the context of everything else. Or understanding what perspective is, which this book is so fucking lazy with. This is something I notice in a lot of the books that we've read, but it was painfully obvious in this one, that they just don't understand what perspective is or what it's for. You're jumping between third-person omniscient, so you can jump between any character in a scene's head at any time, to third limited, so you're stuck with one person, whenever it suits the scene. When it wants to, it jumps between characters' heads and tells you everything they're thinking and feeling, mostly just to deliver more convenient exposition.
Yeah.
And at other times, it wants to be limited to create like tension and mistrust between the characters. But it's a failure to understand why something like third omniscient is used, which can be effective in cases like Dune, for example. That book is written in third omniscient the entire time. And Frank Herbert understood that it can be hard to create tension or mistrust between characters if you know what's going on in everyone's head all the time. But the narrative isn't closed off to one character's true intentions. So he uses that element effectively to straight up tell you that the person one individual doesn't trust is either actually trustworthy or not. And that carries into the whole story. This book just doesn't give a shit. And it's blindly jumping between different types of perspective because it doesn't know how to convey anything properly or at any right moment.
Again, like, I would argue that this book doesn't even deserve that level of critique because, like, even if he had done that correctly, if he had used his tense and all that shit correctly, you still wouldn't have a fucking goddamn story.
No,
like,
you wouldn't.
So you can't. Who cares what tense it's in if this story doesn't go anywhere? If you're not actually doing anything with it, you know?
Yeah. So there's another scene with silence. He starts having some memories of the soul that used to live in his body. And he has like a vision of some demon or something that made a deal with Noir about the Shadow Fiend. And then he comes back to reality. And that's kind of like the only plot point that happens like halfway through the book, is that maybe Noir had something to do with Shadow Fiend waking up and has some plan for him in mind. But that's not resolved in this book. It's barely even talked about.
Yeah.
And then we have like 2 pointless scenes where Noir and Balthazar meet a bunch of new fucking characters with their own 8 paragraphs of exposition, and they get drunk. And then a vampire fights a werewolf. 8 paragraphs of exposition about some guy named Regulus. His name was James, and he witnessed a demon attack in his village. And then Leo, the Zodiac King, asked him if he wanted to lose his memories or die or join the Order. And so he joined the Order. It was renamed Denebula Bet Leonis.
Oh, great.
But then he was given his memories back and renamed to Regulus Alpha Leonis. Okay.
Okay, great. And what color was the door? And what was he wearing? And
okay. And then Regulus executes the vampire for breaking magic law. We go back to the bar, which is where like most of the story fucking takes place.
And that's one of the funny things that I did want to bring up. You have this magical world, and you've got London, and you could go to all these famous sites and twist them.
Yeah, there's limitless possibilities.
Like Harry Potter does. Like, Harry Potter takes famous locations and scenes and twists them with like a bit of magic. You know, you go down to the train station and you go down to the platform 9 3/4.
Yeah.
Everything is slipped in there, and it's funny, and you can go to those places and add so much flavor. And then you get this, and they go to this unknown location, like literally a hole in the ground, like literally just an underground bar.
Yeah.
And half of the story takes place there, and all they do is drink in darkness, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, as far as settings go, holy fuck, what a low ball. Like, wow.
Even at the times where it's about to get interesting, like they're back at the bar and Noir is there to make some payment to someone named Wiltshire. and their business together seems related to Silence in some way. Maybe this is the demon that he made a bargain with. And then just when the story seems to get a bit interesting with a bit of mystery surrounding this character, Wiltshire was a devil's advocate. He bartered in souls. The title of devil's advocate was given to his kind by peers. They were originally created by Satan to tempt mortals into renouncing their souls in return for the fulfillment of their dreams and aspirations.
You know why I specifically...
After God and Satan had given up on their game of soul acquisition, all advocates had lost the meaning in their existence.
And I remember that part specifically, the devil's advocate, because...
It wasn't until the 18th century that the demons realized the worth of a human's wants. Most of the advocates made a fortune selling humans the ability to amount to everything they aspired, gaining countless souls over the years. The more souls the demons held, the stronger they grew. They began to become addicted to the power they gained from each one, and so most put themselves in places that would draw those souls who were susceptible to the corruption of the unfulfilled dreams. 109 belonged to Wiltshire. It was his home, his place of work, and the breeding ground of his prey. In the multi-story club, he was a god.
Now, okay, so like, if you want to take this podcast as an example of the book, like, I'm trying to tell the story and Brady's cutting in with exposition, you know, like, that's how the book is. Like, you just want to continue with the podcast, but no, wait, we have to go through all this exposition first.
You know, did you think that this mysterious demon character was going to have some, like, allure to them, and, you don't know what's going to happen?
Oh, who is he, or what is he doing?
Yeah, what's his intentions? Let me explicitly tell you everything about him and where he's from.
Yeah. Let me ruin everything.
Yeah. Let me ruin my own story for you.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I especially remember The Devil's Advocate because I was reading the book and I was particularly frustrated with something earlier and had skipped forward, you know, and was skimming through and skipped forward. And then I got to this section and I was like, oh, Devil's Advocate, you know, kind of cool. And then boom, exposition. I was like, fuck you, and closed the book and didn't read it for a day. Like, because I was like, every opportunity you have to give me something to grab onto in this book, you ruin it.
Yeah.
You just hit it with a hammer until it's dead.
There's also, like, again, you can tell the author loves his own writing because there is so much meta ego stroking in this.
Yeah.
We're back at Noir's house, and Silence is, like, just walking through the halls and, like, looking at the furniture, and then he finds, like, a bookshelf, and he starts reading all of the books, and it says, after a time, Silence had finished the books and returned them to their place within the dust-filled bookshelf. He had learnt a lot about wizardry from the books he rapidly read, such as the fact that wizards ramble often and pay attention to every single detail, especially the little ones, for that was where the magic was stored.
Oh.
And it's like, you can tell the author's, like, writing about himself.
Yeah.
He pays attention to all the details because that's where the magic of writing is stored.
Oh, yeah, and it just makes you want to, like, smash your fucking Kindle with a baseball bat. Like, I swear.
And then he finds Noir's journal, and the writing tries to be so flashy, but it's using similes like a moth to a flame, and it's like... When the book doesn't rely on the most obvious cliches, it ends up sounding like a confused mess.
Yeah.
There's this whole bit about a book on the bed. It says lying on the bed was a book in a thick black leather binding. The edges of the pages were a dilapidated yellow, similar in color to the teeth of a century-old pensioner who had never caught that lung cancer promised to him by his long-perished father. Like, what is that? What is that line?
Yeah, like, when he's not either copying things straight out of other books or, like, shoehorning in terrible, terrible cliches, he does something like that, and it's garbage.
It just rambles.
It's terrible. I feel like we've destroyed this book. Like,
I want to destroy it.
Me too. I needed this. It was therapeutic.
But we have to get to the end.
As painful as it is.
Jaden, the time-traveling nephew, has a shitty dream sequence. Noir drunkenly stumbles home. Then he goes somewhere else, and every fucking detail about the place he's in is given. There's entire chapters dedicated to nothing. There's a really dumb scene about the vampires' blood banks that's completely meaningless. Like that they think the dwarves stole some of their blood from their blood storage.
Yeah, and the dwarves, the dwarves talk like fucking stupid as fuck.
Yeah, it's like broken English.
Yeah, and this is a special little note I guess I could make about my own writing experiences. You know, first starting out my very first story or something like that, and I can barely even remember anymore, but I wrote a character and he had like an accent, so I wrote the words differently as if to like make it sound as if he had an accent.
Yeah.
And it's the dumbest thing. It just slows down the writing. Don't do that. I learned that and just don't do it.
Yeah, don't do that unless you're fucking Mark Twain.
Yeah, and to be honest, like, just if you're learning how to write, just don't do it. Like, just...
yeah, just don't do it.
Just don't even bother.
We get some exposition about fucking Jasper Bluntfang as Noir sends Silence to collect werewolf taxes.
Oh, yes. Oh, God.
Literally, he goes to collect werewolf taxes. And this is really where I checked out. I just skipped into the end to see if there was an actual story. The book keeps alluding to a story. You know, characters every once in a while be like, we have to prepare for what's going to happen. And so much is going to change.
Yeah, the blue moon. And
yeah. And, oh, what are you planning? And, oh, you'll see. And nothing. Nothing.
I haven't thought of it yet, but you'll see. And let's talk about my shoes first. You know, like
90% into the fucking book, the only recurring thread I could really find was a prophecy about the Shadow Fiend and Noir's missing memories. But not a single one of those things is talked about more than once. The synopsis says that when a rare blue moon settles in the sky, everything changes. Nothing changes. Nothing changes because nothing is in a state to be changed at all.
No. And I mean, like, what a waste of time from start to finish. Like, the synopsis, it gives you the story.
Yeah.
More than the story does.
By the end, literally nothing has happened. No single character has been developed or changed. There's no tension. There's no build-up. There's no conclusion. No story to speak of or any sense that all of this information is relevant to any greater idea. Nothing. This book has no soul, no drive, no purpose. It's just an utter flatline from beginning to end.
It's verbal masturbation for the author, and I wish there was an actual word for this. There's no word for a book that isn't a book, you know, a book that is just word-on-word garbage.
Yeah.
I have these words like book and story and novel, but they don't describe what this is. They implies something about them, and this isn't those things, so what do you call it?
No, because in those days, most books went through a rigorous process of editing, and there was a publisher involved, and they wouldn't sell this because it's just a fucking ramble.
And so this is a modern phenomenon, and we need a modern term for it. And maybe we should coin a term. I don't know what. I just want to say it's shit, you know, but like...
There's also this one part I wanted to talk about, again, with the author stroking his own ego. It's this weird section where, like, he breaks the fourth wall.
I don't know about that. That's gone past me.
Yeah, he must have skipped this part. Jaden, the time traveler, is talking to someone, and it says, whisper, I don't know who that is, it doesn't matter, and a very select few belonged to a cult that worshipped a god known only as the Scribe. These few worshippers each had a copy of the Libro Viventium, a book that chose who could read it. Its contents were unknown to the world, and the beliefs that were held by those who it had chosen were held secret in perpetuity, as the cultists were unable to discuss their knowledge with the many who were left unchosen. But it was said that they believed there was a being who had created the multiverse, an all-powerful being that might eventually perish, leaving the multiverse he had created in a perpetual loop. They also believed that this ultimate god was as significant as a mere speck of dust within the world in which it resided, and that he had only created the multiverse to gain a fragment of respect from the multifaceted god that the cultists had been known to call the Peruser. And I interpret that long section, I don't think it can be interpreted as anything else. It's talking about his own book.
As the author is the god.
Yeah, exactly. The characters in the story worship the Scribe, who's the writer, and he has the Libro Viventium. Guess what the fucking title of this series is called? And how, you know, he had created the multiverse, and he might eventually perish, and he just wanted a bit of respect, and it's like...
Wait, you ain't getting any from us. Sorry.
No.
Nope.
And that's not the worst of it. There's another line that comes after that, which says, "Thank you, Whisper," smiled Jaden as he faded away. Whisper broke his concentration and turned, facing the fourth wall of the room, and he looked past it as he laid his eyes upon reality. And then he says, "I hope you're enjoying the story," exclaimed the Grand Chancellor, with a wide grin smile that shone through his unkempt beard. What do you think of that?
It's just like, I want to shout at my own Kindle, you know, break the fourth wall straight into my Kindle and say, I'm not fucking enjoying it. Like,
oh, wow. The character looks at the fourth wall of the room and asks if you're enjoying the story. And this is like 80% in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I want to upgrade it. It's not just on the nose. It's not being punched in the nose. It's being fucking hit in the nose of the book multiple times. Like,
and just for reference sake, no, I'm not enjoying the story.
Yeah, no, it's fucking awful. It might be the worst book so far.
It's the worst thing I've ever read.
And that comes with a lot of gravitas in our little podcast. I mean, it's a tough title to hold. Usually you only hold it for one episode, the worst book.
Yeah, I want to say, if we're going to keep rating books, and I've been pretty generous with my grade so far, I'm giving this one a 0 out of 10. Worse than Voxia.
Yeah, it's a 0 out of 10 for me because, again, you failed at the very basic thing of making a story.
At least Voxia had somewhat of an idea about something.
Yeah.
It was confused about what that idea was and how to get it across, but it had an idea about relationships or something, and it was a complete failure to say anything meaningful, but at least it said something.
And if you were wondering, what are we actually giving points out for? I give a point for having an ending, for example, or having a middle.
Yeah.
That might get you 2 points right there.
Or having a character.
Yeah. Oh my god, I'm emotionally drained.
Yeah.
This is why I've been depressed for the last week. I honestly, I've been holding this in for too long.
Yeah. And the last scene of the book, Noir writes in his journal about his own delusions of grandeur and pretty much sums up the book in totality. So that was Born of the Shade.
Born of the Shade. Now, if you want to catch the next 2 books in the series, you can buy them on Amazon. There's Born of the Shade, there's Into the Shade, and then there's Out of the Shade. I think. Is it Out of the Shade?
Who cares?
In, out, who cares? No, it won't be getting a read from me. It's getting 0 stars out of 10, and I wish I could decrease the score even more, for wasting my time. Can we give a -1 if it's just literally a waste of time? I feel like I can.
Yeah, I feel like this book owes me points, so we'll give it a negative.
Yeah. It owes me a fucking ending, or at least a middle. Come on.
It owes me a start, at least.
Very least. So that was Born in the Shade, and it can only leave me with positive things to say about the next book.
Yeah.
Which is going to be Bacterium 264.
Ooh. Can you give us a synopsis on that one?
I'll give you the real title first. It's by Dutch Fisher, and it's called Bacterium 264, One Man's Personal Journey into Death. And what a quaint title. I mean, aren't we all on a personal journey into death? How profound.
Particularly after reading Born of the Shade. I hope my death comes much sooner.
Yeah. Now, the synopsis for the book reads like this. The story of Marshall Freeman.
Okay.
All right.
So, we're going to find out who Marshall Freeman is and what his story is.
And what happens. And I love that the synopsis doesn't even have a full stop. It won't bother, cut out the excesses. Let's just get on with it.
Yeah, and we can definitely say that it doesn't matter how bad this book is. It's not going to be worse than what we just read.
It can't be. It literally can't be. Even if there are spelling mistakes in every single word in this book, it will be better. It has to
be. Yeah, for a book that can make me say that I enjoyed reading The Blade of Voxia.
Yeah.
It's something I never thought I'd see.
You could quote Brady, The Blade of Voxia was a good book. Oh, man.
Do we have a bottom? Do we have a bottom where our standards will just flatline? Or does it just keep going down?
At the moment, it is that one. At the moment, it is I've already forgotten the name.
Born of the Shade.
My mind wants to erase it immediately. Yeah, currently the bottom of the barrel is Born of the Shade. It is impressively pretentious. It's not a story. It's not even the beginning of a story. It's mind-numbingly exposited. It's literally unreadable. And I'm not lying. You won't actually be physically capable of going through every page and reading all the words because your eyes will fall out of your head before that happens, it is.
Yeah.
Your jaw will slack down, You'll need to take some Lycanade.
I'm going to need to take some fucking Lycanade to stop my transformation into a hideous monster after reading this book.
Fuck me.
So
don't read it.
Don't read it. So Bacterium 264
next week on the BurnCast.
Yeah,
skyrocketing improvement.
Yeah,
the story of Marshall Freeman.
Hey, we hope it's a good one.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for listening and supporting the show. And please, if you can, support us on Patreon, and doubly so, share our podcast with your friends. It's a huge help, and thank you to all of those who already do that. If you have a book you want us to look at, share it with us on one of our platforms, and we'll consider it for the show. Thanks!